Portland IndieCon, which was a con that took place at the end of June, was a great local convention. It was its first year celebrating small press and self-published comics. It was a collection of artists you heard of and some you wish you'd heard of sooner. There were creator-on-creator talks, workshops, tabletop games, more than enough art to oogle at and of course bring home with you. And if you couldn't be there, if you're not in Portland or you just couldn't make it that weekend, I sat down with a few local creators to give you a little slice of what it was like. But we're gonna start out with David Edwards. David Edwards created Portland IndieCon and he said the decision to do so was pretty easy.
Well, it arose from a simple question. Why doesn't Portland, with a high concentration of self-published and independent comic book creators, have a convention dedicated solely to that crowd?
It all seems so obvious when he says it like that, right? And so when he realized there wasn't a con like that, well, he created one.
Well, I'm very pleased that we have a great mix of creators, ranging from folks who make self-published zines at their kitchen table to folks who do work for many major comic book companies like Image and Dark Horse. The connections were made largely through our sponsor, Floating World Comics, and the creators who signed on early in the process.
Now you guys know Floating World Comics, or you should if you're a fan of this channel. They're located at 400 Northwest Cooch Street here in Portland, Oregon, and I work with them almost every week because everyone there is so nice and so knowledgeable, and they can help you find comics that you aren't reading, but you should be. They have a great local selection, and they also do publishing themselves, which is amazing. So it was really cool that they were the sponsor of this event. Now, sometimes I like to play what I call interview telephone, where I ask the person who I'm interviewing who they think I should interview next, who might be good on camera and who has something important to say, because the people who run the event and are part of the event tend to know a lot more than me, an unwise journalist. And David said immediately that I should talk to Craig Thompson, who was there with his new book, Ginseng Roots.
Well, I'm promoting the first issue of my new comic book series. I traditionally have always done long-form graphic novels. So Blankets is the book I'm probably best known for. That came out in 2003. I've never in my whole comics career, 20 years in comics now, done comic books. And so for my new project, I'm serializing it as a 12-issue series. And first issue is here. And it's actually like ahead of the game, like it won't be in stores for another 3 months. So the new book's called Ginseng Roots, and it's a little bit of a sequel to Blankets in the sense that it goes back to my childhood, growing up in rural Wisconsin, and my relationship with my brother, and about our time spent working in ginseng agriculture. So I grew up in this tiny town of like population 1,200 people, but it was the biggest producer of cultivated American ginseng in the entire world in the 1980s. So imagine this really small podunk rural community dealing for over 200 years in this like Chinese medicinal herb. So since like the late 1800s, it was being shipped to China. And it's most commonly used in, Chinese medicine. Ginseng is one of the most potent emperor herbs, other than maybe reishi mushroom. So it has this sacred quality around it too. So just sort of exploring the way that these two like very distant cultures overlapped and interacted. It's great. I mean, obviously this is like the comics mecca, but I've lived here since 1996. And even then it was a little bit of a comics mecca, but it's really exploded since then. And I mean, back then it was easy to be here because it was a cheap city with a lot of rain, so you were like indoors working on your books, And now I just think there's like all the, there's Image Comics and Dark Horse Comics and Oni and Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and that's, and all these self-publishers, Floating World Comics. So now it's just like you can't really go to a coffee shop without running into someone who's sitting there working on their comics. I don't know how it affects me at this point in my career as a creator, because I'm kind of the opposite. Like when I'm done with my workday, I try not to think too much about comics. But I think for someone who's like just starting and looking for a network and looking for a support group and looking for inspiration and soaking up all the inspiration of their peers, this is the perfect place to be. That would be the first bit of advice, is to find like a community. And I came up from the DIY 90s mini comics thing where you just kind of went to shows similar to this actually and gave away or traded your photocopied zines and mini comics. And yeah, I think that's crucial. Let's just get yourself out there and then start finding your tribe of, fellow cartoonists, like, because it can be such an isolating sort of craft to just sit at home at your desk drawing and writing. So for me, that was the most crucial component. It's just like meeting other artists, meeting the creators. I definitely felt like my shows similar to this were about almost like having a support group, like, so see, we're all crazy in this similar way, and it's really good to find like-minded peers.
And I love that DIY spirit, and it seems to be at the heart of these self-published and small press comics, which is great. As I was wandering around, I ran into Nicole Robinson, who runs a comic meetup at Books with Pictures here in Portland, which is another comic book shop, where she invites artists and creators from all different avenues of life at all different levels of work to come and chat and work together and be collaborative, which is super cool. She said I had to stop and talk to Andrea Rosales.
Certainly, absolutely. Well, I'm a comics artist and I'm also a graphic designer and illustrator. So my training is primarily, my background is in graphic design and animation. So in coming to work in comics, I brought a lot of that with me in terms of how I do my layouts and my love for drawing really expressive, dynamic characters. So A Worthy Distortion is a book that I worked with local comics writer Diane Rockel, and I did all the artwork and helped with the coloring and everything. So it's basically the story of this woman's fight against her internal self-doubt. So anyone who's kind of struggled with those kinds of feelings of, feeling lost or, they're not good enough, it's a really empowering story about a woman who chooses to face that head on and break that kind of cycle of negative thinking. And Nine Twilights is a story that I've been working on with some friends of mine for the past few years. It's a webcomic. This is a standalone issue that I have here at my table. So Nine Twilights is basically magical girls meets Norse mythology. So it's kind of what we get essentially if you mix Sailor Moon with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Thor all into a blender, and examining the idea of what would happen with modern day magical girls if they had the power of the gods, but they also had to navigate their own lives. How does nature and nurture play? It's really great because there is a fantastic creative community already here. And you can, easily find a lot of professionals and creatives at lots of different levels who tell all sorts of different diverse stories and diverse styles. And everyone is so positive and willing to lend a hand. There's the terrific Helioscope studio here in town. And there's also the PDX Comic Crew meetup that happens at Books with Pictures, organized by Nikki Robinson. It's really great. I love to go there and meet lots of other artists. We pick each other's brains, and it's kind of great to get feedback and learn from each other about how do we perfect our craft? How do we become better at doing what we love to do?
Speaking of Helioscope and letting other artists look at your work, Steve Lieber is one of the co-founders of Helioscope, and he was there with open office hours. How's that for a segue?
I'm here to talk to comics readers, to promote my own work, and just to meet other people who are making comics here in Portland. Having a terrific time. I've had some great conversations. One of the things I did when I was promoting my appearance here was tell young artists that these are my open office hours. If you want to show me your portfolio and get feedback on your work, come on by my table, sit at the chair next to me, and I'll be happy to talk about what you do. I love talking to young artists. I had some very, very smart, enthusiastic mentors when I was getting started, and I want to pass that along. I am working on Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen for DC Comics, and I'm having the time of my life on this comic. I'm working with a great comics writer named Matt Fraction, and some other terrific folks on the team. And it's funny, it's wild, it's heartfelt, it's touching. It's a huge, weird, crazy comic that's being made with tons of love. I can't believe DC Comics is letting us do this, but we're having a blast with it. The first issue comes out on comic stands on July 17th.
Oh, soon.
Yeah.
Exciting. Great. And to young artists, Steve's message was clear and hopefully easy to follow.
Do good work, do a lot of it, and put it in front of as many eyeballs as you possibly can.
And it is past the debut date for Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, so go to your local comic book shop and pick it up. It looked amazing, and I'm really excited to read it myself. And I asked Steve who I should interview next, and he couldn't have had more nice things to say about Kirsten Lacrosse, who's also part of Helioscope and is an adventure cartoonist, which is a thing I didn't know existed, but it's really cool.
I am an adventure cartoonist, and that means I do the backpacking thing and I do the drawing thing. My most recent thing is Bashers, which is a graphic memoir about a section hike on the Pacific Crest Trail. Long story short, is I learned the difference between strength and stubbornness and that I have asthma. So, yes, that is why I'm here. There are lots of adventure cartoonists out there, but only a few of us actually use the term. Basically, the challenge is you don't make a lot of money as a cartoonist, so funding adventures is pretty hard. So I'm actually taking the year off right now to sell comics and things like that so I can fund a future adventure, maybe doing the Pacific Northwest Trail or something like that. The other struggle is I can't do this work while I'm adventuring. The extent of what I can do on trail is little, like, sketchbook things. Everything else that you see here, I do at home in a studio instead. So it's kind of like balancing having the adventure and then telling the adventure. Well, I'm moderately privileged, being the fact that I read as a cis white woman, and so that gives me a lot of headway, at least. But there's lots and lots of community here for cartoonists. Helioscope being the one there, it's the largest cartoonist collective in the country. So we all can lean on each other's shoulders. Yeah, that would be my most valuable bit of advice, is reach out to other people. The internet's a great place. Find a small community of like-minded creators like yourself, whether locally or online, and find a way to confide in them. And be willing to be vulnerable with, like, your fears and your weaknesses, and help each other grow. Because we're all in this together. Art, comics and art, it's not a competition. It's really not. We're all here to help each other grow. There's the weird stigma of, like, older cartoonists or creators seeing the younger ones they're doing and feeling jealous of them. It's like, oh my God, they're only 19, you know, how dare they be so good? But no, it's not really like that. Like, we are excited to see young people being so good, especially these days because they have so many more resources than we did. And we just want to see them get better.
And look, I know this video took me a long time to get up, but it's not because Portland IndieCon wasn't super cool or super interesting, or I didn't want to bring it to you guys, because it was all of those things, and I really did want you guys to see it. I just got a little busy, I'm sorry. But I love that there's a con now for something like this, for the people who self-publish in small press comics who maybe don't get as much attention as, of course, big press comics do. And so I love that there's something for the creators here in Portland to go to and have a resource for, and I love that people like me who are interested in small press and self-published comics can go and meet the creators in a sort of a more intimate setting, and also look at all their work without being jostled around like you're in a Comic-Con mosh pit. So I hope this event prospers in the future. This was its first year, and I thought it was really, really awesome. There was such diversity in the people who were there and all the different styles of artwork and all sorts of stuff. It was really, really fun. Be sure to follow these artists on social media and Floating World Comics, and keep an eye on your local comics community, because you may find an artist that you'd never heard of who becomes your new favorite. Lots of amazing things are being done in the DIY comics community around you. You just have to look for them. So that's all I have for you this week. Again, sorry it took me so long. I am back onto a regular schedule, so I'm very excited to bring you your, regularly scheduled content. That's what I meant by regularly scheduled. Okay, this has been KGW's Comic Ramble of the Week.
Ramble of the Week.